We just watched Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, Season 1, Episode 6, Udun. What are your thoughts?
I thought that despite all the action that occurred in this episode, that it was one of the weaker episodes of the series. It didn't have a lot of logic in it. Like, some of the things that happened just didn't seem to make sense. The payoffs were pretty weak. And the timeline of the episode, like, there's some shots that were at night, preceded by shots that were during the day, and then back to the nighttime sequences, but those were supposedly happening at the same time. Just didn't make logical sense. So all that plus some stylized action that I don't think really worked for me. Yeah, all in all, it came out to be a pretty weak episode, and I think because of that, I have to give it a 4 out of 10.
Okay, so quite a bit different score-wise. I have the same sentiments, but obviously not as strong as you, because I was going to give it a 6. Just because it's finally some payoff to all the setup we've been doing. And yeah, there's some stylized action. I didn't mind it so much. The visuals were good as always. But mostly, yeah, just because the plot is finally moving forward, which is maybe sounds like a low bar, but that's probably because it is. So let's get into it.
All right, so what happened? This episode was very action heavy. It's the boiling point of the storylines that we've seen from the Númenóreans and the humans. Humans are fighting against the orcs. They get backup from the Númenóreans. They fight off the orcs, and then a big event happens at the end. Mount Doom explodes. Pretty exciting on paper. How it played out, what did you think?
Not being a chemist, physicist, whatever, I thought it was a bit goofy that a bit of running water explodes a volcano, but obviously that's possible. Just seemed a bit of a goofy mechanism, that's all. And for that to be the payoff of the tunnels, to be just a
of
river.
All things, the tunnels end up so that they could put water, get Mount Doom to explode, and then black out the sky? Is that what they were doing?
Yeah, so I think the purpose is to block out the sun with the explosion of Mount Doom, which is fair enough, and this leans more towards the gray aspect of the orcs, where it's like they're not doing this to spite humans, they're doing it to benefit themselves, so it's, selfish motivations, but for good reason, which I kind of liked about that whole plot line. That being said, the means to the end there was kind of goofy.
Yeah, it seemed a little bit of left field, but I'm sure if you were to go back throughout the last episodes that we've seen, although they don't mention Mount Doom that much at all, you could kind of see okay, maybe that's what, because they didn't explicitly say we're building the tunnels so that we could hide in them, right? It's not like they told us, but it just kind of coming out of the blue, and I don't know, the execution just made it seem a little bit nonsensical.
I will say we did have some hints of it last episode with Adar saying this is the last bit of sunlight I'll ever see in the forest at the beginning. And then also the artifact they were looking for, that kind of had some payoff.
Yeah, what happened with that one?
It was a key to unlock the dam that let the water into Mount Doom. And I have a couple questions. Why was the watchtower actually a dam? And
why was this ancient key built just to open a dam that could have possibly been built after? This key looks so much more ancient than the watchtower, in my opinion. Maybe that's just my perception of it, but it just seemed like a really convoluted MacGuffin.
Yeah, I don't know how to describe it.
And the payoff was really underwhelming. They make this weapon seem so mysterious and powerful and evil, but it just opens a dam to flood the Southlands, and it's not even malicious. If you think about it, without the tunnels, it's not even a malicious thing, because the tunnels are the reason why it goes to Mount Doom.
Yeah, it left me with a bit of confusion, to be honest. More questions than answers. which, when you're dealing with the payoff of a multi-episode arc, should not be the case, in my opinion.
Yeah, when things happen at the end of the arc, the payoff should, feel rewarding, or like they were building up to it, and it just seemed like it was an afterthought.
Yeah, I also didn't get the sense, like you do in some movies and TV shows, that like the good guys lost bad. I don't have that like sense of doom afterwards, versus a movie like Rogue One, for example, where even though they get the plans out, you feel like it's a heavy heavy ending, because all the characters are dead and, they suffered heavy losses, even though it's like a victory.
The cost of winning.
Yeah, and in this episode they lost, and I didn't feel any of those types of emotions. I was just like, oh, okay, so that's what the sword was for, and it just kind of redirected my thoughts towards, not what the focus should have been, which is the fallout from Mount Doom exploding.
Yeah, and I think the reason why I was pretty cold on the episode, like off the start, was the plan by the humans didn't make, I'm going to say this a lot, didn't make sense, or it was poorly thought out. So they're in the watchtower with guarded gates, they've got the height advantage, pretty much everything going for them, only one path up there. And they decide to leave the watchtower to go to an open field back to the houses where they haven't been set up for days. And like they just gave up all potential advantage in the trap that they sprung on the orcs. Like if they had more people there, they probably could have defended it a little bit more instead of scrambling to get everything set up down in the valley.
Yeah, and like the plan they executed in the village, they could have done the exact same thing in the watchtower, but better, because it's actually built as a defensive outpost, by the looks of it, with only one path up and, water to your back and nothing for the enemy, like the height advantage, like you said, all that.
And you can funnel them on the pathway. It's not like the orcs, like they can climb, but they're not, like, we haven't seen them, scaling mountains or like prepping that at all. So they had advantages.
Yeah, and then the payoff too was like, kind of just, I was left with more questions rather than being like, oh, what a smart plan. That's good for the humans. Go, go, go.
It's more so like, okay, you did that, but now what? Like,
also,
you still have to fight like the whole army.
Yeah. So, like, was their plan to be saved by the Numenorians the whole time?
But they couldn't have, accounted for that because they had no idea.
Which brings up more questions. How did the Numenorians know where to go? How did they get there just in time?
Supposedly, they would have been led by Halbrand.
Yeah, but I mean the precise location of the battle, right?
Yeah. And with them, especially being the first time they're on land,
or
on Middle Earth. And then they allegedly rode their horses from shore to the location that the humans were at in one night.
See, and that's
I think that might be a disjointed timeline that they could do in editing, but they didn't it's like, if you think about it, it's like, okay, sure, it could work that way. But not because you need more visual cues.
There weren't any cues other than the fact that it made no sense.
Because you're in a nighttime, you're in a daytime, but it's not distinct that they're, a day out or something at that point. Like, it's like, all hope is lost right now, and they're riding right now.
Yeah, and they also went into full gallop, miles away from the battle, which I thought was, again, goofy.
Yeah.
But beyond the
I do want to bring up some good things.
Yeah, I was just going to say, beyond the parts that didn't make sense and left us questioning things and kind of brought down the score, there was some good stuff.
Okay, so I mentioned that the stylized action kind of brought it down for me, but at the same time, I can appreciate that because I've been watching a lot of, early 2000s, late 90s movies. If you watch, The Matrix or even, Underworld, those kinds of movies, even Riddick to a certain extent, they have action, fight scenes that are that kung fu, modern kung fu, American kung fu, and it looks good, but it also kind of felt just like a Dragon Ball Z fight in the middle of my Lord of the Rings, where no one else fights like that. And like they have shown like the elves sometimes do, but it's like it just is a little inconsistent. But I do like it like in a bottle. Other things I thought were were intriguing and aggravating. Where Hallbrand, we're getting more hints to who he is in his backstory. You could read into that pretty heavily.
See, I'm a little of a different opinion because like we are getting hints that he has a backstory, but we aren't getting anything about the backstory. It hasn't built his character, it's only built the mystery, which is like, it's fine if you build a mystery, but if that's the only thing you're building... I think it's working
a little bit slightly for me because they're contextualizing the mystery a little bit more rather than just like doing the Aragorn king who didn't want to be, and then he has those small words of like, but you don't know what I did. But then now you're kind of seeing like, okay, with Adar, like there's something between them,
Yeah, it didn't really add to any of the characters to me, except maybe Adar. It made him a bit more interesting. But I don't know, he was already interesting enough to me. It's like Hallbrand I want to know more about and understand better. And I don't understand him any better after this episode. I just know that there's more, but we don't know anything about it.
One more thing that I liked was the explosion of Mount Doom. Looked good. I thought it looked good, and it like at least is if you were into the episode, it's a good way to end it like on a cliffhanger of okay, where's like what comes next?
That was gonna be my next question to you. What comes next?
What comes next? I don't know. I'm having a really hard time. I can predict certain things, like the setup for this episode. It was very obvious, like it was written out like, okay, this is exactly what's going to happen. With Mount Doom exploding, that's a little bit harder because is it just going to put everyone in recovery mode at the end of a season?
Yeah, I just imagine like if this show was titled differently, if it was titled like The Adventures of the Second Age or something.
Or Tales of the Second Age or something along those lines.
Yeah, we would have legitimately no idea where the show is headed because the Rings of Power at least centers it around these mythical, like magical items that are gonna be forged soon. So we have something where it's like, okay, this is all headed towards that, and because that's involved, we know Sauron is involved. But if we didn't have those hints in the title, I'd be thinking like, well, what if they don't involve Sauron? And well, what is the goal of the good guys, or what are they working towards?
So speaking of the good guys, do we still consider Galadriel like a good a good person? Like, she's like, there's light side, dark side kind of thing. Is she still considered light side when she's trying to like, basically saying that she's going to commit genocide against the orcs and their kin?
Well, that gets into the argument of if you're fighting for the good side, does that make you a good person? It's like a moral philosophy almost, where I pretty much summed it up there. Just because you're fighting for a good cause doesn't make you a good person, and that's what we're seeing with Galadriel, I think, and her attitude towards the orcs. So does that make,
when you hear her say those things, does it make you want to follow that character anymore? Or like for me, it almost made me lose almost all, like nearly all interest I had with her.
Well,
because she became one-dimensional.
I'd be very interested if they somehow flipped the script and made the orcs like the protagonists and like Adar the protagonist. That would be very original and unique.
Yeah.
I just don't believe that's what they're going for. But the way this, episode went with Galadriel having her little spiel and Adar responding with his, if suddenly like we focused in on Adar and like his backstory, his motivations, maybe how Hallbrand like did him dirty back in the day, and that like somehow fed into him siding with the orcs even more, and they're just trying to build a home, but they're being their homeland is taken over by the Southlanders, something like that. And then
like give him a Zuko from the Last Airbender kind of character arc, or
Well,
not
not even
necessarily
an arc.
not necessarily make him good, but just flesh him out.
just like a perspective shift is all we would need, where it's like, oh, we were cheering for the wrong guys the whole time, like what a twist. But that doesn't really make sense because Nori and the Stranger and Elrond and Durin are all here, and
Okay, that's another thing I want to bring up with like the Harfoots and the dwarves and the elves. We're not in this episode, but you talking about the Stranger, like I'm 100% convinced that Halbrand is Sauron reincarnated. So that basically makes the Stranger like useless in my opinion, like uninteresting. Because like yeah, he's gonna end up being a wizard, and it's just like I don't know. I've lost almost all interest in the mysteries that they built up. And the ones that I was interested in, like we had mentioned a few episodes ago, was like they just solved them very quickly.
yeah. That being said, there are still some things I'm looking forward to in the next episode, namely Durin and Elrond.
Yeah.
As always, looking forward to that. But I'm interested to see where they go now that a couple of the plots have converged and we got like a big plot resolution, really. So it's like, what's the fallout going to be? You know, if Galadriel isn't fighting Sauron, is she still going to be motivated for that fight? Or is it she just against orcs in general now? Like, you know, is it... Because originally it was just about Sauron, it seemed. But in this episode, it seemed like, well, maybe her vendetta is against Sauron and everything he touches, almost. Like, you know, scorched earth policy.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess we'll see more about that. And then they're teasing us with Halbrand, so I don't have any faith that they're going to give us a resolution to that mystery anytime soon. But
I swear, if the season ends and like they reveal that he's Sauron, my eyes are going to roll into the back of my head, and it's just because you can see it like. It's an original, like I said last time, it's an original character. What are you going to do? There's two ways you could do it. Like, you could do it for a surprise reveal, right? And if that's a surprise reveal, it's going to feel so unearned. And also, like, the fan base, the ones who are very vocal, they're already against the show. And it's like, you're also, for someone who's a little more casual like me, it still doesn't work, you know?
Now, the way they could do it, where it could still be interesting, would be if they have, I believe the term is dramatic irony, where we, the audience, it's revealed to the audience at some point that he's Sauron, but the characters within the show don't know. So, like, Galadriel doesn't know it's Sauron. I guess Adar probably would, based on their interactions. But that'd be the main one, is Galadriel. So anytime after the reveal to the audience, we would be like, you know, there'd be more tension in every scene between Galadriel and Halbrand, and they could do some interesting things with that, but I get the feeling they are going to reveal them simultaneously to the audience and to the characters in general.
Like the I am your father moment.
Yeah, something like that. But they definitely could do it where they reveal the twist, and then they not drag on, but bring in a lot of tension by not revealing it to all the characters at once. So you're like, oh, he's a deceiver, and they get all those things going as well. That being said, I think they're going to retreat from Mordor, and they're going to be looking for a home for the Southlanders, and somehow this is going to be like the fall of Numenor is the new plot line, which has not been set up except for the Vision
wave.
and the Palantir. And the Great Wave episode. So we'll see more of that, but that just seems like, I don't know, they sowed the seeds and then they didn't follow up on it at all. And they're probably going to go back to it, would be my guess.
Okay, I just want to say, I know I sound very negative on the show, and it's tough for me because it's like I really want it to be good. And seeing it be, you know, it's still like average to good TV, generally speaking. But I just expect so much more, especially from $1 billion, investment from Amazon. It's painful. So I'm wanting it to get better. And season 2 just started filming in the UK. So maybe I'll just have to try and, shut off the Lord of the Rings brain. I know it's kind of counterintuitive when you're looking at a franchise like this, but it's like, maybe that's the only way I can just judge it on its own merits. And yeah, I want it to be good. I hope that the Mount Doom Explained is kind of like a reset point for characters to work together that we haven't seen interact yet. Because we haven't even seen a lot of the Numenorian cast and the human cast, they've just exchanged a few words because there's only a few minutes left in the episode, right? So I'm hoping that once they start mingling everyone, that it starts to be a little bit more cohesive, character-wise. And I hope they pull out a strong finish. Season 2 starting filming. It can only get better, right?
Yeah, I will say at this point, with season 2 being confirmed to be on the way, they are going to have to bring up the quality, I think, for me to be tuned into season 2. Because as it is, the show is probably not something I'll hold on to a month from now, is the way I feel about it right now. But like you said, there's still time for them to turn it around. It can only get better from here, so that's what I hope.
All right, well, these were just our thoughts on Lord of the Rings Season 1, Episode 6, Udun. If you liked our discussion, leave it a like. If you want to see more, hit the subscribe button. If you have any comments, leave them in the comments section down below, and we will see you next episode.